Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it's your Wi-Fi Plantain, and today I'm going to be making a follow-up to the video I just dropped about Theo. Now, as I'm sure most of you are aware, Theo dropped a little Twitter comment about how, Joe Rogan has been blabbing his mouth. He's been saying that, Theo's suffering from mental health issues and, he's taken all these pharmaceutical drugs. And Theo is not a fan of that. Theo believes that he's fine. He's absolutely fine. He's healthy. He's just getting on with life. And he doesn't like the fact that Joe Rogan seems to be perpetuating this idea that he's mentally unwell, which fair enough. It's understandable. Like, most of us don't want our issues or our, personal life to be out there on the internet. So yeah, I understand where Theo is coming from. And if you've been following Joe Rogan for years, I remember the first time I discovered Joe Rogan was probably in 2009. I was quite younger, much younger than this. Unfortunately, I'm old as fuck now. But yeah, I remember discovering Joe Rogan in 2009, a long time ago, before he even had a podcast. Joe Rogan used to talk about DMT and flotation tanks, and I was really interested in hearing this guy talk, because back then Joe Rogan just had this way of speaking that would really kind of entrance you. Like, he would take you on a journey. He was such a great talker, man. His language was so flowery and beautiful and effervescent or whatever. That does sound a bit gay, say that, but Joe Rogan really had a way with words back then, and he still does now. That's essentially why he's the biggest podcaster in the world. But I remember back then, I was much younger back then, so I'm hearing these words and I'm excited. It's so fantastical. If you take DMT, you're gonna find out the secrets of the universe. If you go into a flotation tank and take DMT, and just, bro, I was completely enthralled by Joe Rogan back in the days. And contrary to what people may believe about me and this channel, I don't hate any comedians. I just report what's going on. I report the news. Some people don't like what I have to say. That's fine. Some people like what I have to say. That's fine. I'm not trying to make friends here. I'm just breaking down what's going on in the comedy world. But yeah, contrary to what people believe, I do not have an issue with Joe Rogan. I never have. Like I said, I was a big fan when I was a kid. So yeah, Joe Rogan's always been into psychedelics and whatnot, and recently I made a video about this as well. Joe Rogan kind of put pressure on Donald Trump to kind of push forward this new bill that would allow psychedelics to be more accessible and more legal, I believe. And Joe Rogan's a massive proponent of things like ibogaine and stuff like that, which really help with addiction. So yeah, you can tell that there's a big difference between Joe Rogan's way of thinking and Theo's way of thinking. Theo in the past has talked about being on antidepressants and certain pharmaceutical drugs. Joe Rogan clearly is not that. Joe Rogan comes from DMT, he comes from ibogaine, he comes from all these psychedelics. I remember back in the days, Joe Rogan used to talk about this, what was it, the stoned ape theory. We're going back in time with this one. Back in 2009, 2010, Joe Rogan was talking about the stoned ape theory. I remember that. Oh wow. The stoned ape theory is the idea that our minds evolved with the assistance of plant-based medicine. That's what Joe Rogan used to push back in the days. And I believe, the theory actually comes from, what was it? Is it Terence McKenna? I may have got that wrong. It's been a while since I delved into that world, but it may have been Terence McKenna. Maybe that's someone else, guys. I do apologize if I've got that wrong. He's always been into psychedelic drugs, and Theo is the exact opposite. And we all know, it's 2026. People are struggling to pay their bills. Life is harder. The politics is crazy. Trump is trying to kick out the immigrants. Today, right now, here in the UK, there's a rally going on in London. I attended last year just to see what was going on, because I was just trying to be like a journalist just to see what's going on. But this year, I was like, hell no, what I mean? So yeah, there's a rally right here in the UK today, led by Tommy Robinson, who many consider to be a far-right activist. He's hated by many, loved by many. A lot of British people love him. A lot of British people hate him. He's a very divisive figure. So right now, nowadays, life is hard. Life is difficult. There's so much stresses. So for me, I understand why certain individuals would take pharmaceutical drugs to kind of deal with their depression, their anxieties, their whatnot. But from Joe Rogan's perspective, I also understand that, because let's be honest, some of these drugs can really destroy people. I've heard of many stories of individuals taking an anti-anxiety medication like benzodiazepines, which is the technical term for Xanax, and it, when they try to get off this drug, it completely destroys them mentally. I remember reading an article about how this British dude, he was on benzos for like 20 years. He decided to stop taking them. As soon as he stopped taking them, he was having panic attacks. He thought his bloody house was leaning forward. Everything was going crazy and haywire. Gravity was literally falling apart before his very eyes. So I understand both sides. I really do understand both sides. Yeah, that's just a little context. 6 minutes context. I do apologize, guys. But let's try and delve into again what is going on in regards to this whole situation, because the first video I dropped was very short. I literally just read about it, so I thought, let me just get the video out as soon as possible. This video is going to be more slower paced. We're going to delve into it. We're going to explore some more. So yeah, let's get into this. I was actually exploring Reddit, which I do from time to time when I want to find out the latest stories in regards to comedy news. I try to traverse the internet for the most interesting and most entertaining, but a lot of the times, especially nowadays, I try to look for things that are informative and may actually benefit you guys, because the sensationalist stuff, it gets a bit boring to me at times, and I'm pretty sure it gets a bit boring to you. So I try to be informative. I try to find different stories you might not have heard of. I try to bring them to your attention, because I believe that's very, very important, exceedingly important, especially nowadays, nowadays, let's be honest, with the TikTok and the YouTube shorts, and it's just destroying our brain cells. So I try to find stories that are intriguing. So yeah, this is another Reddit thread in regards to this Theo Von story. And basically the headline is, I think Theo and Joe are teaming up to take down SSRIs. Now, this is a bit of a conspiratorial Reddit thread. I'm not sure about that, but let's just check out what Theo Von actually said. Apparently, he made this post earlier in the week, and again, it's in regards to people kind of talking bad about him in regards to drugs and anxiety and depression, which we all know Theo Von has experienced for many years. So basically, the post says, hey, some people are saying full stuff and posting things online, trying to make it look like I'm struggling or something. That's just not entirely true. I'm doing fine. Now, I'm a human like most of us, and I'm going through human moments, and some of them are well, you know how they are. They're just human moments, and some days are awesome and some are hectic, but I'm doing great. People want to say things and I don't know why. I can't control that, but I can speak up for myself. Amen. Have a great weekend. I think I'm going to the rodeo. So again, this is clearly Theo Von reinforcing his mind state, reinforcing how he sees himself. He doesn't believe there's anything wrong. Again, in my personal opinion, if Theo Von is saying there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. I'm going to take his word for it. He has onus over his own body. He has, autonomy over his own words, over his own body. I'm going to buy what he's saying. He may be suffering. But again, I'm not going to speak for him because I don't know him. I'm just the average guy. And most of us are just average Joes just tuning in to, this podcast drama, this podcast beef, whatever it is. I don't think any of us have any right to prod and poke at any individual just because they're on screen and, we watch them weekly on their podcast doesn't mean we should, take the piss out of them or try to speak for them. If Theo Von is saying he's fine, I'm going to take his word for it. Now, of course, Like I've said many times, Theo Von does have a history of, anxiety. He's talked about it plenty of times on his podcast, but again, I'm gonna take his word for it. I've always kind of liked Theo Von. To be honest, I always thought it was extremely funny. Going, early on when he was starting to rise, I was like, damn, this guy's funny, especially the accent. He has a way of speaking, like the way he would describe, like the way he would describe his like body parts and stuff. Like instead of just saying fingers, he would say appendages and things like that are just genius. Because we know what it means, but it's just the fact that he chooses appendages over fingers and stuff like that. It's genius. It's genius because he knows it sounds funny. And a comedy, a lot of it is about what sounds funny. Because appendage is just a normal bloody word, but just how it sounds, the fact that he would choose that word as opposed to a finger is just hilarious. But my thing with Theo Von was always the fact that he did seem to, I wouldn't say he would use the N-word regularly, but that the N-word did seem to tickle him quite a bit. He would laugh about it. I remember his early jokes did reference the N-word quite a bit. I remember back in the days, Theo Von used to have a lot of racial jokes that clearly, as a black individual, I clearly don't approve of that. But again, I kind of deviate between left and right when it comes to Theo Von. I try not to, when it comes to comedians, I try not to overanalyze. I realize they're just human beings, but at the same time, just because he may kind of not be the most left wing of people, I still try to give him grace. I still try to give everyone grace. I feel like on this channel, I try to be as impartial as possible. Some people despise that. Some people despise that. Even the latest video I dropped, a video I dropped a few days ago in regards to Tony Hinchcliffe, a lot of people despise that, downvoted that to hell, completely ratioed the hell out of me. It's fine. It's okay. You know what I mean? Of course, what these people don't realize, this channel primarily started out as a Kill Tony fan channel. This is the irony. People don't understand things, people don't realize that. They see one thing, they don't realize the history. This literally started as a Kill Tony fan channel. You know what I mean? I still watch Kill Tony from time to time. It's kind of, I'm not the biggest fan of it nowadays, but yeah. So the idea that I hate Tony Hinchcliffe, no. But I was just commenting essentially on what I saw. But anyway, back to the subject here. So clearly Theo Von, he's breaking it down. There's nothing wrong. He doesn't like people talking bad about his name. He despises that. Let's check out what this guy said about Theo Von. This is Theo's response on Facebook to Joe's podcast this week. It's different from his response on Twitter. They both seem tailored to their respective audiences, which made me think maybe these were written by his PR team, which made me wonder, was this planned? Was Ibogaine the gateway to Joe realizing how much influence he has in this administration when it comes to health? Or was that planned all along, years or months ago, as a soft start to Joe Rogan being socially acceptable as a White House influencer, just to get the public used to it? Theo was friends with RFK Jr. long before it was cool. Is it possible that this administration was planning to use Joe's podcast as a staging ground for Theo addressing his mental issues and they've been saved by quitting SSRIs, blah, blah, blah? So yeah, this is a very conspiracy-laden post. And a lot of the commenters don't actually buy what this guy is selling. They don't actually buy what he's selling. It belongs on Conspiracy. It belongs here if you know anything about Joe Rogan experience. So yeah, interesting. But yeah, putting the conspiracy aside and focusing strictly on Theo Von's mental health or mental state. Again, I think it's up to him. If he's saying that there's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. Here's a post I found out about earlier, coming from a guy called Darren of Plymouth. I believe he's actually from the UK. And as you can see, He basically references the video where Joe Rogan talks about how, Theo Von is suffering, and he believes that Theo is going off at the deep end with his anxieties and his pharmaceuticals and yada yada yada. This should end Rogan's career. To publish these statements is as unprofessional as it gets and confirms he is compromised. So a lot of Joe Rogan's fans, a lot of his, the people that actually watch his content, even they're starting to turn against him. Which is a massive surprise. Now, if we actually scroll down and check out the comments, Robin Williams had everything, yet he thought it was better to die than to live. Be careful of beta blockers. They are foisting these things on everyone. I take one for AFIB. I'm not entirely sure what that is. And the thing makes me vibrate for 8 hours. Pressure is good, but my head ain't. So I believe this guy, LC, he's on the side of Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan, again, is not a fan of pharmaceuticals. So these comments are quite divisive. Some people agree with Joe Rogan. Some people agree with Darren of Plymouth. Another comment, you're all very strange. Nothing he said is nothing that hasn't been said a million times. Theo openly discusses this shit all the time. Agreed. Theo does talk about this all the time. Like I stated, a while ago, I actually made a video, after that whole Netflix bombing. I don't really like saying that because, it's not fair to say things like that. Theo is a human being. Clearly he's going through anxieties, but I remember a few days after that, I made a video about it. We're going to check that out again, just to kind of, for more added context. But yeah, as you can see, the comments are very different, coming from both sides of the argument. Joe's an idiot. If Theo isn't doing well, last thing he needs is pressure to get off SSRIs, which is essentially what I've been saying. If you believe someone is suffering, you gotta learn how to kind of talk to them. You can't be addressing it in public. Call them behind the scenes, and I'm sure Joe Rogan has done that. But again, talking about it on your platform does seem a bit risky. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I don't think it was the smartest thing to do, Joey. Shout out to Joe Rogan. Like I said, I love all these dudes. I want to see them. I'm happy to see Joe Rogan prosper. Like I said, back in 2009, I was listening to Joe Rogan. But, at the same time, what I like to do anyway, I like to look at things objectively. I've always been like that. And, in this situation in particular, yeah, I don't think Joe Rogan played the right hand. Another comment, he could be trying to call off a hit. No. Let's read this. He could be trying to call off a hit on Theo, might be trying to spread off a message to plead insanity for Theo's case. Rogan is a made. Yeah. Oh yeah, let's actually explore this. It's possible that Rogan could be a made man, to be fair. Now, to be honest, I don't know much about the mafia apart from the movies I've seen for the Goodfellas. As you guys know, big movie fan, which explains all the ridiculous intros I make. But yeah, yeah, that's a very interesting one. That's a very interesting one. I'm not personally, I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm trying to be as soft as possible, because people get very, triggered if I say something that, you don't agree with. So I'm trying to be as soft as possible. I'm not sure I agree with it. That's my personal opinion. But, shout out to everyone. Everyone's free to express their opinion. He loves Theo in his own way. He's trying to help. You are dumb for posting this. Again, I agree. understand Joe Rogan's perspective. He's an older gentleman. Joe Rogan's like in his 50s, perhaps 60s maybe now. You know what I mean? So again, like I said before, he sees himself as a father to many of these comedians. And I respect Joe Rogan for that. I really do. You know what I mean? Because let's be honest, a lot of us need guidance. You know, a lot of us, especially when you're younger, you need guidance. And especially in the world of comedy, comedy is difficult. You know, I've never really stepped on stage and done it myself. If you just look at the history of comedy, we're going back to, you know, the days of Richard Pryor. We all know, well, those of us who are into, you know, comedy and the history of comedy and these legends like the Pryors and the, you know, Eddie Murphys, well, we all know Pryor, man. He essentially attempted, you know, the big S at one point in time, you know, and then he talked about it on stage afterwards, maybe a few months after. You know what I mean? These comedians go through it. Like, how many times have you heard of comedians, you know, taking cocaine, taking amphetamines, taking, you know, all sorts of, you know, drugs, high grade drugs, and completely destroying themselves? How many bloody times, man? Was it Kinnison? Kinnison to me is one of the greatest. His voice was just amazing. That guy, the way he would just scream in your face, yeah, what the fuck is that? Yeah. Kinnison was a genius, but even Kinnison dealt with issues to do with cocaine and, you know, many of these drugs. There's another comedian that I really love. Can't remember his name now. His name evades my mind, but he was a legend. He was a bloody legend. He always used to like kind of smoke and stuff. I don't really think he did drugs. He will talk about drugs, but he never really did drugs. But he was a heavy smoker. He was a heavy smoker. And yeah, unfortunately, he passed away, you know, before his time. The guy was a legend. I think him and David Letterman had some friction towards the end of his life as well. What's his name again? Forgotten his name. But yeah, so many of these comedians, they deal with, you know, anxieties and stress and depression. So yeah, Theo is not, I mean, he's not a special case. This is consistent with a lot of comedians. Saying Theo's legitimate criticisms of the sitting government are related to his mental illness is a seriously disrespectful comment, but Joe's friends rarely challenge him, so he just has free range to say shit like this. I don't see what's wrong. There's a concerned friend. I don't see what's wrong. That's a concerned friend. He's talking about public videos, not private conversations. Again, that's true. That's true. But again, it's like, you know, like Theo Von's a sensitive guy. We know this. We know, all of us know this. If I could try and see things from his perspective, I think he would rather Joe Rogan kind of refrain from being overly talkative. I think that's what it really is. You know, this is my life. This is my life you're talking about. This is my well-being. This is my mental well-being. Some people just like to keep things close to their chest, especially when it's to do with their mental health. You know what I mean? So yeah, as you can see, the comments are going back and forth. They're going back and forth. Eventually, Joe Rogan will talk about this on his podcast. I don't really think it's a major beef or anything. I just think Theo Von, at this point in time, he's just getting tired. He's getting pissed off of, you know, people talking bad on his name, you know, throwing dirt on his name. And I understand that perfectly well. People throw dirt on my name all the time, Fried Plantain. As I said, that video I dropped a few days ago, most downrated video of all time on my channel. I haven't even checked it recently. Probably has like 2,000 downvotes. So, you know, people talk down on my name all the time, you know. So I get it. And I'm not even on the stage. I'm a bloody YouTuber. Going forward, I just hope that we learn to be more sensitive towards people's, you know, mental state and their mental well-being. You know, we talk about mental health all the time, but let's be honest, a lot of us are not really taking care of our fellow neighbor when it comes to this whole mental health bollocks. Let's be honest. People say mental health this and mental health that, but then it's like, you're roasting this guy online, you're roasting that guy online. It's I just think we need to try, and going forward, we need to learn to be more sensitive to these comedians that I understand a lot of people on the left don't like. People like the Theo Vons and the Joe Rogans and, the Tony Hinchcliffes. A lot of people don't like these guys, But again, it's like we need to be, I feel we need to be more sensitive to people's mental health, mental state, we can't just talk the talk, we got to walk the walk. So yeah, I just hope going forward everything resolves between Joe Rogan and Theo Von. And yeah, that was my little rundown. That was my little follow-up. I might do this from time to time. We'll see. But yeah, until next time.